Greetings from the frosty and COVID-19 lockdown south. I am David Hook. I am here to talk about some recent and upcoming developments in cryptography. For those of you that have not met me, I'm primarily a cryptographer and spend a lot of my time maintaining the Bouncy Castle cryptography APIs. I have included this photo so everyone knows what it looks like when it's actually legal for me to go and get a haircut, rather than what's currently happening, which is I'm basically stuck at home doing it myself. Anyway, so the biggest thing happening at the moment, well, at least if you're a cryptographer, is the NIST post-quantum competition and the upcoming FIPS standardization of the IETF standards for extended Merkle signature schemes, XMSS, and late Macaulay hash-based signatures, LMS. I'm also going to look briefly at using these algorithms, both in terms of the mechanics we found that work for our users, and also to give some idea of the expectations that certifying authorities such as NIST have about the use of these algorithms. As we will see, they are a little different to what we've become used to. Finally, I'll provide a few links at the end in case you want to do a bit of reading of your own. The NIST post-quantum competition kicked off in 2016 with an announcement followed by the selection of 69 candidates for round 1. As you can see, the competition has 5 categories of security parameters which attempt to equate to some of the algorithms we know and understand now. Originally, I think the expectation was that this equivalence of security would be easy to establish and that the competition would probably only go through 2 rounds. However, it has turned out that for many of the algorithms, research is ongoing and the development of security parameters which provide the level of assurance that we are used to with algorithms like RSA and elliptic curve has been quite difficult. The reason for the different categories and their expression relates to the idea of establishing a cost of both raw computation and other resources, such as the need to build a computer capable of carrying out the raw computation in the first place. Note the cost, of course, is being stated in terms of what we understand about classical computers. But while quantum computers are obviously a bit different, the feeling at the moment is that it would take a very surprising technological development to render the weight of these costs in terms of measuring the effectiveness of the submitted algorithms obsolete. Anyway, given that the interest was in the public key algorithms for signatures and encryption, 69 was rather a lot of horses to try and fit onto a 2-lane racetrack. Round 1 would have been exceptionally brutal if it was only followed by round 2. So rather than too much pushing and shoving on the racetrack, 26 algorithms made it into round 2, and we're now at round 3, where there are at least 7 finalists and 8 alternate candidates. I'll talk about the special meaning of the alternate candidates a bit later. They're not quite what they seem. So with the finalists, we have 3 signature algorithms: Crystal's dilithium, Falcon, Rainbow, and 4 public key encryption and key encapsulation algorithms: Classic Michaelis, Crystal's Kyber, True and Saber. Now, both Rainbow, which is based on multivariate polynomials, and Classic Michaelis, which is based on coding theory, are already well-established algorithms. Earlier algorithms on multivariate polynomials and also Michaelis have actually been broken, but advances that have been made since the algorithms were originally put forward have led to Rainbow and what is now Classic Michaelis. These algorithms have stood up well to attacks. Michaelis itself dates back to 1978, but the effective security parameters that have been used to date were introduced in 2008, copper codes. Likewise, multivariate cryptography goes back to 1988, but the first published version of Rainbow algorithm dates back to 2005. In that respect, both these algorithms are quite old from a post-quantum perspective. So, anyway, I guess the point there is if there were 2 algorithms selected in each category as finalists, it would be worth considering that Rainbow and Classic Michaelis would make the list. The other thing which really ups the odds, if we continue with the racetrack metaphor, is that NIST have also said that only 1 lattice-based candidate would be selected in each category. Personally, while there are some IP issues that need to be addressed, I think it is unlikely NIST are going to put all their eggs in one basket and bet the farm just on lattice theory. Crystals stands for Cryptographic Suite for Algebraic Lattices, so it does provide a one-stop shop which might make things more attractive for people looking at the amount of likely infrastructure required, either in hardware or API, for covering off both signing and encryption. The algorithms are developed by IBM, and IBM made them open source as well. And at this stage, they're even implemented on all things a secure tape drive. It would be tempting to give these algorithms good odds too. The other algorithms, though, are also kind of interesting. While they are also lattice-based, they do lean heavily on the idea of trying to do one thing properly. In an area like cryptography, there is a lot to be said for that approach. I should stress, though, that in a talk I recently saw by Lily Chen from NIST, who's a mathematician and project leader from the Cryptographic Technology Group, she was quite adamant that owing to the fun they have already had trying to establish the security of different algorithms and their parameters to date, it was too early to call the race, and NIST still felt that a photo finish was going to be likely. So the alternates. As part of round 3, NIST have also listed 3 signature algorithms and 5 encryption key encapsulation mechanisms which they thought had interesting potential. That's a direct quote. I think this is partly a just-in-case measure, as these algorithms also include stateless hash-based signature mechanisms, the use of isogeny, as well as additional code-based and lattice-based algorithms. It's possible to think that NIST may have nominated these just in case one or more of the actual finalists met with an unfortunate accident, something which is still possible. The other thing that they have said, though, is that they anticipate around 4 in order to study these algorithms further in any case. So it does sound like they may be looking at standardizing some of them in the future, possibly with a view to making them application specific. Sphinx Plus, for example, is a stateless hash-based signature algorithm. There are obvious advantages to using it, assuming the security stands up, if you look at it from the point of view of using the simplest hardware possible. Chem, on the other hand, is already recommended by the German Federal Office for Information Security as cryptographically suitable for long-term confidentiality. As I said, none of these algorithms, at least from the point of view of a total nerd like myself, are what you would call dull. So I would suggest keeping an eye on them as well. The upside, of course, of the prospect of a 4th round, to look at the alternates, is that we've now got a timeline for the end of the 3rd round, as NIST have indicated they would like round 4 to begin in May 2021. Jokes about quantum superposition aside, we would expect round 3 to finish before round 4, so let's hope that happens. While NIST do expect a photo finish, it does sound like we won't have too long to wait. One of the other interesting things that's come up here too is you probably note that while people have talked about Grover's algorithm, there's still no discussion about symmetric algorithm replacements for AES. It turns out that the kind of quantum computer you need to effectively implement Grover's algorithm is fairly different to the one that you can actually implement Shor's algorithm on. You can't tolerate any noise when you're dealing with Grover's algorithm. So the expectation for the moment, at least, is that AES is actually going to stand up reasonably well, and that there may even be a time lag of up to 50 years before somebody actually produces a noiseless quantum computer post, the first successful breaking of an RSA key using Shor's algorithm. Anyway, this is all very well and good, but we still get people asking, so I want to create a root certificate that will last 20 years. What should I do? At this point, 20 years is a rather long time for either RSA or regular elliptic curve. Most by now have heard of Micali-Mosca's predictions. And as these appear in things like his talks with the really encouraging titles, such as "Quantum Computing Will Decimate the Security Infrastructure of the Digital Economy," it's likely that, one would not necessarily want to be shipping a long-term RSA or elliptic curve key right now. It does sound a bit like while the cavalry, as represented by the post-quantum finalists, are on the way, there's really a more immediate problem to solve. In this case, the algorithms came out of the IETF standardization process, and NIST has picked these up for use in special publication 800-208. LMS, which is presented in RFC 8554, is actually based on a patent that was published in 1995, now expired. XMSS goes back to a paper in 2011. Both algorithms are in fact based on Merkle trees and one-time signatures. They get around the one-time restriction by having private keys which maintain an internal state. The security of these algorithms is very well understood, has been quantum hard, and for those of us wanting to generate a lot of signatures who don't mind them getting a bit bigger, there are hierarchical schemes which people can use for both HSS for LMS and XMSS MT for XMS. Both these schemes have the advantage of keeping the public key for verifying the signature the same size, whilst producing larger signature sizes than the non-hierarchical equivalent. There's also PKI CMS support for LMS available already in IETF standard RFC 8708. There was a draft which included XMSS, but it found in the submission process and nothing additional has been done yet. A number of open source projects, including Bouncy Castle, support both algorithms now. Both Bouncy Castle and Botan, for example, also support the draft RFC for PKI using XMSS. But there's a catch. While the addition of the state to the private key does get us around the original issue with winterness one-time signatures, we are not quite there in terms of finding our winterness of discontent, so to speak, with one-time signatures turned into the sweet summer of being able to churn signatures out whenever we want using a single private key. The problem is that reuse of the state in the private key will rapidly compromise the security of the private key. So you really have to be careful to make sure that the state is updated with each signature produced. Otherwise, it is a case of finding yourself in a creek composed of excrement in a rather compromised canoe. Anyway, this is not something we're really used to dealing with. What we are used to doing is handing out private keys to multiple threads and servers and generating signatures on a cheerfully asynchronous basis. So some caution is required, a change in approach is required. And before I look at what we've done using Bouncy Castle and what people using Bouncy Castle are doing, I should also point out that at least as far as SP 800-208 from NIST is concerned, key and signature generation require a HSM and a level 3 validation before the CMVP will even consider validating an implementation. Given this is the case, it's likely that different organisations that certify these algorithms will need to adopt this approach. So, getting back to another version of the world, the non-FIPS one, using one of these keys on a generate on an essentially ephemeral basis is okay. The key disappears when you fall over, there's no need to save the state. But if you want one to survive between reboots, just treating it like an EC or an RSA key is clearly not going to work. In our case, the solution was to make the key partly ephemeral, so we were able to find a kind of workable solution by making it possible to sacrifice some of the key space from the LMS, XMSS keys in the event of a server crash. We called this key sharding as it's basically the same idea as data sharding. I'll apologise now if somebody has a better name for this, but at the time it was all we could come up with. Anyway, the process is fairly simple. You load up the persisted stateful key, take a copy of it, advance the state of the original key as if you've done, say, 100 signatures and save it, then hand out the copy, having set it so that it can only be used to produce 100 signatures before failing. The idea that whoever you give it to will go off and generate 100 signatures, and if for some reason they fail catastrophically on the way to doing that, you will not have sacrificed your entire key space, and at the same time your original persisted key won't be at risk of actually reusing state. This scheme is not perfect. Although it's tempting to think it is, it's surprisingly hard in a virtual world to make sure something has actually definitely been saved to a disk. Not totally impossible though, and we do allow access to the signature ID for the key. So it is possible to save the signature ID in multiple places, including a certificate serial number, and thus make sure that you don't accidentally hand out the same signature twice through filtering. I will admit, though, that I am also inclined to lean heavily in the direction of HSM for the sharding step, though still, there are times when necessity has to be balanced against risk. So, here is an example of doing key generation and sharding with LMS. In this case, we are just generating a 5-level tree, so yes, this will give us 32 signatures. You'd probably want to be doing this for a trust anchor. The one-time signature is configured with a W1, which provides fast signatures, but also makes the biggest due to the size of the Winton's coefficient used in the signature. One gives us a signature which is over 8,000 bytes long. Yep, signatures in these algorithms are a lot bigger. For LMS, the W parameter can go up to 8, which produces longer signing times, but signatures which are only 1124 bytes long. XMS also produces signatures of similar sizes with similar considerations. Anyway, after the key generation, you can see a method call which is extracting the shard. Once the call is executed, LMS priv will have its index moved along by 10, and LMS shard will be a 10 use key. LMS shard itself can also be sharded as well if you want to partition it further. So given everything I've said, where does this leave us? The NIST competition still has till May 2021 to run, and there will probably be another 6 months or so before an actual standard is produced. We have a couple of signature algorithms which are combat ready now, but caution is required, as while the algorithms themselves are both safe and quantum hard, misuse of a private key will have catastrophic consequences. On top of that, signatures are larger, and where you need to generate a lot of them, they just get bigger and bigger. So for people dealing with long-term trust anchor problems, it's likely to be better to make your root certificate LMS or XMSS. Probably LMS at the moment, due to XMS's incomplete standard support, and use a more normal algorithm such as EC or RSA for the CA level down, as these certificates will expire sooner, and you can set them up to get yourself onto the other side of the NIST competition if you need to move to a new post-quantum algorithm. For something like timestamping, you probably want to go full throttle. Timestamps are generally expected to last decades. You'll need something like sharding at a minimum, as you'll probably need to multi-thread the timestamping process so that your server can handle multiple requests. For this, though, you could do your identity certificate using a key which will not survive a reboot, so your risk profile should largely be represented by how you handle your CAs and trust anchors. Otherwise, you could use one of the hierarchical schemes and avoid the use of some of the CA certificates by absorbing the cost in the signature. I guess the important point, though, is that while the time for us to talk about crypto agility is not completely past, it's rapidly getting overtaken by the time we also need to talk about crypto resilience. If you're going to sign or encrypt something now, it is very important to be aware of how long you might want the signature to last or the encryption to hold. Finally, there is a list of places to go if you feel like trying to get yourself up to speed. I would point out the links really do only scratch the surface, and you'll find there are plenty more if you want them. Unfortunately, doing a search for crypto resilience only seems to produce links about Bitcoin. A sign of the times, I suspect, although I was sure I'd read about it, read people discussing it elsewhere. Anyway, it's a simple idea. The main thing is you just need to think about what the future holds for your signed data or application. Your signed data rather than your application. If you keep in mind what's going to happen to your signed or encrypted data, you should be able to minimize the likelihood of any unpleasant surprises. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch via the conference messaging service, and I will try to get back to you. Or email me if you like. Cheers.